What's up, guys? Today we're going to react to a video called Why Good Graphics Don't Matter. So this is a video by November Hotel. I've never heard of this channel before, but it seems like a very interesting video. Now, before we start watching, I think graphics do matter, especially for like the more casual gamers. I think the visual aspect of things do matter, but the thing is, I'm not saying that it's not, it shouldn't be more important than every other element. It should pretty much be balanced, right? So that's like my initial take on things. So I'll say a lot more as we watch the video. So here we go.
There's always been an obsession with video game graphics ever since their inception, and as years have passed, graphical technology has improved as hardware has improved, naturally.
That's true.
And seeing the leaps in graphics since the early 2000s has been nothing but amazing to witness during my time as a gamer.
Very
But
true.
over the last
That's very
decade,
true.
graphical improvements began to mean much less. Comparing games
I don't think they start to mean much less. It's just that how do I phrase it? They're not really like. The problem is developers these days just tend to focus more on the graphics rather than the actual like uh, elements, the more core elements that make up the game, right? I don't think they matter less, to be honest. I think they still matter because I'm still going to pick like a good looking game over like a shitty looking game. This is really like humans are very visual creatures, right? That's why we don't like to see ugly people in video games and ugly people in general. I mean, it is what it is, but yeah, I don't really think that, like, oh, what did he say here again?
but over the last decade, graphical improvements began to mean much less.
Yeah, I don't think they mean much less, to be honest. They still, I think, well, this is more personal, I guess, because like when I play like a new game, like it's not really graphics, of course, is the first thing we see, right? And then after that is the art style. I think the art style actually matters more than like the graphical fidelity itself. But we do have standards still, right? It has to like still like be at least like this good and that good.
Comparing games from 2023 to 2013, I often find that not just a few, but a lot of those games from before 2013 still look better than the ones releasing in current year.
2013. I don't really know. Like I don't know at what year like things started to plateau. The graphics are still improving though, like day by day, year by year. It is still improving, but the thing is it's not as exponential as it used to. Like the growth isn't as exponential as it used to because I think we've reached a point where technological advancement in general has just slowed down. It's plateaued a bit, and I don't mean plateaued where we've reached our limit. No, we haven't reached our limit yet, but this is the point in time where things start to slow down. That's why I've always told people like about the PS5, and like I have friends that have been waiting for the PS5 Pro, and like I've always asked them why. What's the point of waiting for a PS5 Pro? Because they said it would be better, but if you think about it, it's not gonna be that much better than a PS5 because, like I said, technology has kind of slowed down a bit. So it would be better, sure, but like not by a long mile, not by a long shot. Like probably like even if let's say the PS5 Pro can play 4K 120 FPS, it's possible. I don't know. They haven't released anything about the PS5 Pro yet, but there have been some news. But you would still need a monitor or a TV that could do 120 FPS, right? Like right now, the PS5 can do 4K 60, and I think for most people that's really good enough.
Now, certainly there are some noticeable improvements if you really focus on the textures and analyze the pixels.
Yeah, like
When
there really is like a big well, not really like gigantic leap. There's subtle differences, right? Like I mean, you can anyone can tell there's like a very like there's a difference. There's a difference from 2013 game versus a 2023 game. Like anyone can see that.
comparing a modern game to one a decade old, but playing a game like Dishonored from 2012 or Bioshock Infinite from 2013,
I've never played these games, but they do look good,
or
to be
even The
fair.
Order 1886 from 2014, if you didn't know any better, you'd think these games were new releases. They just don't look as dated.
I mean, Crisis looked very good back in the day. I think it's I don't know. I haven't really looked at Crisis this year.
As you might think for being 10 years old. Yet despite the technology getting better since then, very few games can top these games, or even match them visually. So why is this? Well, like
Again, I really don't think it's the graphical fidelity that's the problem. I think it's more the art style, really, like, like the theme, the theming and stuff. It's different from before because it's like it's an artistic choice basically. Whoever is the lead graphics designer or whatever it's called, like they decided on this particular art style, right?
all things, a tool is only as good as the one who wields it.
That's
And
true.
when in the right hands, modern game development tools can produce amazingly impressive results. But unfortunately, so many studios have been putting out games that, while graphically are impressive due to their technology that they're built with, end up looking like utter dog shit. A game like Forspoken has great graphics.
I haven't played Forspoken yet. I do plan to play it. I don't think it's as bad as people think, to be honest. Like, but I'll reserve my thoughts for when I play it.
But looks extremely generic and almost blinding in its visuals, in a very washed out and ugly sort of way. Immortals
Yeah, that's not really, that's not the graphical fidelity. That's more the style that they chose.
of Avium, a game released just a few days ago running on Unreal Engine 5, is graphically outstanding, but looks like an Unreal Engine asset flip project, even though I know it isn't. The devs probably did work very hard on creating those assets, but it just doesn't come across that way. And it doesn't help that this game in particular is so visually bloated. Like, I
mean-
love fast-paced games, but I can't tell
Yeah, this does look good, but again, it's more really the style rather than the graphical fidelity.
what the fuck is happening on screen here. The visibility is just awful due to the graphical and artistic style they went for.
There we
While I
go.
understand that realistic graphics sell to the casual audience, I'm always looking towards companies that have a more distinctive
Realistic graphics, like, I mean, I don't know. I think again, our art style is also a preference. That's the thing. Like, we can all tell what's graphically better and what's graphically worse, right? If we're talking simply about graphical fidelity, I'm sure most like how do I say this? Most gamers with a trained eye can probably tell. But when it comes to art style, I think it's more of a preference because I have a cousin who thinks that Diablo 3 and Diablo Immortal looks better than Diablo 4. And I personally disagree. I think Diablo 4 has way better graphical fidelity. It looks way better. And I think the reason they say Diablo 3 and Immortal looks better is because they prefer the art style, the more cartoonish 3D art style over the more realistic art style of Diablo 4. So, yeah.
art style instead, even if it is more low poly. Some wrongfully ascribe this generic look of video games to the Unreal Engine itself, but just because a game is made in Unreal doesn't
yeah.
mean they have to look like it.
Yeah, they don't have to look the same. Unreal just, provides you the framework, basically the tools to, like, you can have like different art style even using like the same engine.
This. I think Sea of Thieves is a great example of a game that takes advantage of the strengths that the Unreal Engine provides.
Yeah, so this kind of art style, it's kind of the same as World of Warcraft, Valorant, those kinds of games.
And is a beautiful game in many regards, but it still has a distinctive art style.
And the thing is, art style is what makes the game somewhat unique and, how do I say it, rememberable. Is there another word for rememberable? Like, it's what sets it apart from all other games, basically. Like, if you look at something, oh, this is Valorant, this is WoW, right? Like, that's really the thing.
that separates it from a game like, say, Atomic Heart. It's not the engine, it's how
So
it's
a
made.
lot of these, like, how do I say this? Like, games like these, like, is there like, how do you describe like this kind of genre? Usually, like games like Cyberpunk, Atomic Hearts, they usually kind of look the same because they're trying to go for realistic, quote unquote realistic, but at the end of the day, it ends up looking generic. But graphically, like if we're talking about graphical fidelity by itself, it looks good. It looks way better than games from 10 years ago, of course.
Being used. Firewatch, a game made in the Unity engine, is another example of a game that's a visual treat, yet is not what I would consider AAA graphics. And to get to the main point,
Um, that's I don't know. If you ask me, this looks like AAA graphics because again, when you compare fidelity, it's hard to compare graphical fidelity between two games that have different art styles, right? Like you should compare graphical fidelity between a cartoonish game, cell shaded. This isn't cell shaded, but let's just use cell shaded games as an example. So cell shaded game versus another cell shaded game, right? So that's how you should compare graphical fidelity, because if you compare like a, let's say like the Joblo how do I say it? I mean, that's the Joblo thing is obvious though, because Joblo is a new game. Joblo 4 is a new game, and Joblo 3 and Immortal are way older, so it would be obvious that the graphical fidelity of Joblo 4 is better. But like, how do I like? What's a good example of um games with the same like? Oh, okay. I have an example. Octopath Traveler versus like, let's say the old Final Fantasy 4. See, they're both like sprite based games. The art style is like sprite based. Um, but Octopath Traveler has better graphical fidelity, right? Like that's how I would compare it.
point here, I'm a strong believer that graphics don't really matter. To some degree, sure, but we've reached a point in the last 10
They
years,
do.
and especially
They still matter. I think they still matter because, like I said, like most people will not like. I have a lot of friends like they would not play Final Fantasy 1 to 6 because they think the graphics is quote unquote bad. Like, I mean, sure, I can see where they're coming from, and I can understand because like it's just like newer games are just more visually appealing, right? So at the end of the day, it's more really the art style that is turning people away, and not really the graphics itself.
in current year where graphics have mostly plateaued. So art style is
There we
everything.
go.
And the
There
fact
we
that
go.
games
This is what I was talking about, guys. Art style. It's all about the art style at the end of the day.
from 10 to 15 years ago still
And it always has been, like, even in like the olden days, like Final Fantasy, if you compare it to like say Fantasy Star or Chrono Trigger, they have a very distinct art style compared to those two other games I mentioned, or Dragon Quest. Like even Dragon Quest has a very different art style. I'm talking about like the old Final Fantasy, the old Dragon Quest games, the old Chrono Trigger, the OG Chrono Trigger. Like they have very distinct art styles that uh, which helps us tell them apart from each other, right? So they never really looked the same. Like the problem now is a lot of games have very, very similar art style, especially these games that aim for realistic graphics. I think that's really the problem because I don't know if it's like I think a part of it is also like a psychological thing in our minds because when we play video games, it's supposed for most people it acts as an escape from real life, right? But if we see like realistic graphics inside the game, it kind of blurs the line a bit. It's like, wait, I came here to play games. I want to see like game graphics, but now I'm seeing like real life graphics. So at some point, I don't know, because like VR is gonna be a thing soon. Like, I don't know how. I'm not really against like these realistic graphics, but it's not really, it's not my cup of tea. Like I don't really, I prefer like more, cartoonish cell shaded graphics personally, compared to the more realistic, close to real life kind of graphics. But yeah, art style is everything.
Hold up really well today is a testament to how true that statement is. Games like Rage from 2011 or Stalker from 2006 still hold up incredibly well. And games like Fable
I mean,
is a testament to how true
I've
that
never
statement
played
is.
these games, but
Games like
just looking at this is under the umbrella of realistic graphics.
Rage from 2011
this one, like, in a way,
or Stalker from 2006
yeah, they all kind of look similar actually. So I don't know why he uses these as examples. Maybe I'm wrong because I haven't played the game as much, so I can't really judge perfectly. But I don't know. This is just coming from, like, you can view this as coming from the perspective of someone who, like, is brand new to this kind of thing. And if you look at it in that sense, then I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? I think like most games that have realistic graphics, realistic art style, I mean, tend to look very similar.
still hold up incredibly well. And games like Fable or Dragon Age and Kingdoms of Amalur employ a timeless art style and visual style, so they can be enjoyed for years to come. 2 years
Again,
ago
I
with the
don't know.
release of Elden Ring, there was some very strange rage bait online about Elden Ring having bad graphics.
The graphics are dog shit.
Bad
Are you sure
graphics.
about
I haven't played. I really want to play Elden Ring and all the Souls game. I haven't played it, but I don't think. Again, it's not really bad graphics. It's not. The graphics aren't bad at
The
all.
graphics are
Like, how do I say this? Like, let's talk about something newer. Armored Core 6, for example. The graphical fidelity isn't like, how do I say this? Is not what I expected it to be. It could be better, but again, like, it doesn't really, like, for Armored Core 6 and Elden Ring, they're all right. Like, they're not bad. It's just that it wasn't really their focus. Like, the graphical fidelity isn't really their focus. It's more on the gameplay and the game design and all that. But the art style, though, they have a very like definite art style that, oh, you can tell this is Armored Core. You can tell this is Elden Ring.
dog shit. The graphics are dog shit.
I mean, this looks like the graphics was set to low, though. I don't know. Again, I haven't played it, so like I don't know how it looks like in the highest setting possible.
Graphics are dog shit.
But I'd take 100 different games with an art style half as good as what FromSoft delivered before another Atomic Heart or Immortals of Avium or Forspoken.
It's hard to judge Forspoken because I haven't really played it.
And I do want to reiterate something I've mentioned in my past videos, and that's that these two things aren't mutually exclusive. You don't have to pick just one. A game can have
Exactly.
both amazing graphics and an amazing art style.
That's true.
And even high visibility. I think games like BioShock and Dishonored perfectly encapsulate that. But even games like Doom 2016 and Eternal are great looking games. And a trick I recently learned about Doom Eternal is that the lighting on the enemies are separate from the environment, so they are always lit and clearly visible, even in darker areas.
Okay.
This in turn makes the game look less cinematic or realistic, but is much better for the gameplay Doom serves, and even the art style. The game director Hugo Martin said that during development for Eternal, they had at first made the lighting come from the environment much like they did with Doom 2016. But in playtesting it felt really bad because oftentimes you couldn't clearly see what it was that got you killed. And with Eternal being a much more punishing game and more fast-paced,
I think I think really something like that kind of depends on the game and kind of depends on the player. Because sometimes I do prefer, realistic lighting. Like, if something is in a dark corner, I kind of would want to expect it to be hard to see. It's annoying, sure, but like this is the thing is it's like I said, it's more personal actually. Like if you're trying to min max or be efficient, you want everything to be clearly visible, right? So like sometimes when I'm trying to play competitively, I like try to like tweak my graphics. Like it is what it is because but if you're like trying to like experience it in a more, immersive matter, immersive for me at least, I think you would want things to be as authentic as possible. But well, this is a design choice by them, so I can't really. I'm not saying it's bad or it's wrong, but it is what it is.
2016, visibility took precedent over realism. And I think what's really important to take away from that is visibility really matters in games. It isn't just
That's
the
true
Mortals
though.
that has this problem.
That's true. Like a lot of games, let's see. Diablo 4 even, like it's so hard to like see ground effects sometimes when there's like so much shit on the ground. But I think it's very easy to fix though. They just need to like, make some effects more pronounced or change the color and all of that. And well, it's really the thing is the thing you mentioned earlier, if something isn't lit, like realistic lighting, if it's something is in the shadows and you won't be able to see because it's dark, I think that's fine, to be honest. If you're like again, if you're not playing competitive, if you're playing competitively, that's gonna suck, so you're gonna want to change the settings a bit. But if you don't want to play competitively, that would feel very good, right? Because like the like wow, holy shit, that's very realistic. So I can't really say if what he's saying here isn't really like um one all be all, right? It's not. It's more personal preference in the end of the day. So I think if games like these, I think the best thing they could do is just add settings for it, like if you can turn on special lighting or not, or like cinematic lighting or whatever. I think that's the best way to go for it to like satisfy both sides of the spectrum.
It's a problem I and many others have with many different modern games. Now, I primarily play PC on a
Can't see
27 and many
shit. I
others
mean,
have
I
with
can
many
see that
different
though.
modern. It isn't just Immortals that has this problem. It's a problem I and many others
Is that really hard to see? That's not really hard to see. Even if I'm not zoomed in like that, it's not hard to see. So I don't know. I don't know.
have with many different modern games. Now, I primarily play PC on a 27-inch monitor like 4 feet from my face, yet oftentimes there are so many cases where it's almost impossible to see an enemy that's right in front of me. Why does it feel like everyone just blends into
What?
everything?
Really?
Now, some might throw out the realism argument here again, and games going for a more military sim style or something like that should lean into the fact that it's hard to see.
I don't know what he's talking about. I wish he gave examples about people right in front of him and he can't see, because I think if someone is right in front of you, you'll be able to see. You will be able to see that. I mean, your crosshair will turn red,
Enemies. And while I can understand that to
right?
a certain degree, seeing things in
Maybe not in this game, but in some games, if your crosshair is in line with an enemy, it turns to a different color.
real life is much different than on a screen. Looking at a mountain range in real life versus a picture of that mountain range, your eyes can pick out much more things in person, whereas in a picture you're going to lose a lot of detail because you just have captured a 3D environment but on a 2D plane.
I don't really think. I don't think this argument is really that strong, to be honest.
And when you play video games, it's on a screen, which is essentially a picture. You aren't going to be able to see the same things on this mountainside in Battlefield 2042 compared to if you saw this mountain in person. I think back to the 2008 to 2012 era of FPS games, and the textures were a bit lower resolution, but the character models were often highly detailed, and it really made them stand out by having sharper objects on somewhat of a more blurry backdrop. This made it almost more akin to real life because your eyes can pick out an enemy a bit easier in those older games, especially at a distance. And funnily enough, you'll often see competitive FPS players cranking their graphics down in games.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. Like, usually when people try to play competitively, they will try to crank the graphics down, but it's usually for other reasons. Like, aside from, all the, how do I say this? All the disturbing things that you can see, it's usually for frame rate. They usually do that for more frames and less input lag. So it's not normally it would be that. It's not usually to so you can see things clearly. And a lot of games these days, if you turn the graphics, if you turn the slider down, some effects won't be visible, making it actually harder to play the game. Like what game was it? I think it was NGS recently, like for Dark Falls Aegis. If you turn the graphics down, like the lasers or something will not be visible, so like it would be hard to dodge. Or I was it the missiles? I forgot. Like, but you know what I mean.
In order to have a bit more of a competitive edge. And while I don't think every game should look like BattleBit, it's been a lot of fun playing that game and having long-ranged engagements in my gameplay. You can actually see enemies from afar, or see someone when they...
I think that's really very similar to what he showed earlier, to be honest. I don't know, like a lot of his arguments seem to be like very nitpicky. Aside from the art style argument, because that's the strongest one. Art style is very important, but like this is very nitpicky. What's he saying now?
Peek out from the side of a building. And it feels great to have some of that long-range gunplay in a Battlefield-style game again, like I did back in Bad Company 2.
Like, I can see that. Can you guys not see that? I can see the person moving. I think he just has bad eyes. I think the guy just has bad eyes, to be honest.
I think one of the best examples of art style being more important than graphics, though, is with the PS5 Demon's Souls remake. I think in every way except for graphics, the remake is worse than the original. The atmosphere...
What? I haven't played the Demon's Souls remake, but what did he say?
atmosphere is much diminished. The art direction became more generic looking, and both the enemy designs and environments have been changed to go against the visual storytelling that the original did so successfully. And in turn, while Elden Ring doesn't have the graphical fidelity of the Demon's Souls remake, I think it's a far better looking game because of its incredible...
The thing is, Elden Ring was built for mostly... The thing is, when developers make games, they tend to like adjust to... When they're making games for multiple platforms, they tend to adjust to see the lowest, the weakest like machine, which is at this point in time was the PS4. And like with the scope of Elden Ring, it's kind of, I think it would make it harder for them to how do I say this, like optimization wise, and like just the time of completion to like make the graphics like, you know, like blow it out really good and have it play good. So I think this is really their choice to not really focus too much on the graphics, but focus more on the gameplay, the AI, and all the elements, the core elements that make up the game.
Strong art direction. Another example I've mentioned in the past is about the Destiny franchise, where there are many instances where Destiny 1 looks better than Destiny 2. The art direction and lighting of the sequel leaves the...
Really? I don't know about that.
Is where Destiny 1 looks better than Destiny 2, the Destiny franchise, where there are many art direction.
I've only played Destiny 2, by the way, and I've only played a little bit.
Another example I've mentioned in the past is about the Destiny franchise.
How many years was the gap between Destiny 1 and 2 anyway?
Where there are many instances where Destiny 1 looks better than Destiny 2.
I don't really agree with that.
Because of its incredibly strong art direction. Another example I've mentioned...
This does not look... I mean, it's okay, but...
in the past is about the
This looks better.
Because of its
I don't know, guys.
strong
Like
art direction. Another example I've mentioned in the past is about the Destiny franchise.
I don't understand now his argument, because Like this looks better. It looks higher, you know. The resolution is higher, the fidelity overall is higher, and it's brighter too. That wouldn't this be a better thing for an FPS game when it's brighter? A competitive FPS game. I don't know.
Where there are many instances where Destiny 1 looks better than Destiny 2. The art direction and lighting of the sequel leave.
I think this is better though. It's hard to like see things from his lens because I think he's I don't know, he's projecting something or something or what?
Leaves the game feeling a bit more plastic than its predecessor. And while there is definitely some incredible visuals inside of Destiny 2 areas, it's when comparing places inside both games
Places.
that you can really start to notice just how big of a drop off there is in the sequel.
Really? Is that really a drop off?
Inside both games, that you can really start to notice just how big of a drop off there is in the sequel. Several shots on the Cosmodrome or the moon are noticeably uglier, and
What?
there is in the sequel.
I don't
Several
know.
shots on the Cosmodrome
Do you
or the
guys
moon
agree
are
with this?
noticeably uglier, and even
I don't agree. I don't agree. See, the difference here is there's fog.
is in the sequel. Several shots on the Cosmodrome or the
Like the fog is thicker.
moon are noticeably
It's not uglier at
how big of a
all.
drop off there is in the sequel. Several shots on the Cosmodrome or the moon are noticeably uglier, and even in the reprised raids like King's Fall, great use of shadows and contrasting colors from the original are now washed out, and great use of shadows and contrasting colors from the original are now washed out, and
Well, that's because the lighting here is different. Like you can't really compare. Like the terrain itself has changed. You can't really compare that with this. There's a hanging light over
great use
there.
of shadows and contrasting colors from the original are
And here it looks like the whole room is pretty much lit up from another source.
now washed out and missing detail in the sequel.
Magbago man ang panahon, doon ka
I
na
don't know.
fearless. Champion!
I'm not saying he's wrong,
Some of
but
my favorite games visually are ones
think
that use
he's
an
wrong.
almost cartoon aesthetic, like Overwatch, which has a very Pixar-esque look, or games like Kingdoms of Amalur, or the Fable games, or a game like Alice Madness Returns. These games all hold up incredibly well today. Their visual designs have stood the test of time and can be played today without feeling
that's because their art style is unique.
too dated, due to the strength of the art direction and atmospheric design. Now some games have bad art
Yeah, so it's mostly direction and atmospheric design, right? So I think with the Destiny 1 and 2 thing, graphically speaking, like graphical fidelity, if we're talking about fidelity alone, it's way better than Destiny 1. So I think the issue is more like, you know, the direction of the art style. They wanted to change things. Like I understand that there should be change because it's a sequel, and then you know you want the player to feel like the places have evolved in a way, right? So like I guess that's why, and I don't think that's a bad thing though. I don't think that's a bad thing. That's why I'm saying a lot of his arguments are nitpicky because um I don't know. Like they decided to remove the hanging light, they decided to change the lighting. I don't think it makes it significantly worse. Like it's really hard to say that the graphics are worse because I don't really agree.
style and bad graphics. I think Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are a pretty good example of that. Both graphically and artistically, they look like absolute shit. And that's not the Switch's fault. Sword and Shield on the Switch looks much better than Scarlet and Violet, and for some reason, the more 3D and open world the games have gotten, the worse the visuals and art direction. It's both unfortunate and confusing because a game like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, a game also on the Switch, looks pretty good given the hardware. And I was hoping Pokemon's visuals would also on the Switch. Unfortunately,
Again, this is this is really a design and art style choice. It doesn't mean that it's I can't really it's hard for me to agree with this guy because
games have gotten, the worse the visuals and art direction.
The visuals are not worse, that's for sure. But the art direction, you can't really say art direction is worse because it's like, if this guy wants to, how do I say it? If you compare two artists, you let them draw the same thing. The other guy uses paint, and the other guy uses charcoal. Would you be able to tell which is worse? Like, I don't think that's a fair comparison, to be honest. At the end of the day, I wouldn't say it's worse. It's just like all you can say is maybe they could have picked a different art style, right? I don't know.
It's both unfortunate and confusing because a game like Xenoblade Chronicles 3...
But the thing is, Pokemon is a kid's game, and I think that's why it looks like that, right? It's much, if you're a kid, it's much easier to like process those kinds of, graphics.
The game also on the Switch looks...
Because there's a lot of psychology that goes into making these games, like Xenoblade, for example. It's more of a teen, it's rated for teen, right? So like, the more... this kind of graphics is better suited for it. Like, if Pokemon had this kind of graphics, it wouldn't be Pokemon, right? Like, I don't know, man. I might be crazy, but if Pokemon looked like this, it would look like Palworld. You guys know about Palworld, the Pokemon game with guns? That was Jesus Christ. I might play it just for the laughs.
pretty good given the hardware, and I was hoping Pokemon's visuals would at least be somewhere in that ballpark by now, especially since it's clearly possible.
Again, when you say visuals or graphics, we're talking about fidelity and realistic versus believable.
Every time I hear a studio try to sell their game and their focus is on how cinematic or photorealistic it is, I usually just check out. The industry spends so much time trying to make games realistic without remembering that games should focus more on the gameplay and its art direction. It's like they say, every time a game developer brags about how cinematic their game is, an angel loses its wings.
Wait a minute, it's not... This game isn't bad though. This game isn't bad. How could you say that? What the fuck?
I care much less about a world that looks ultra-realistic and more about a world that feels realistic, with a clear, cohesive art direction and world building through its environmental storytelling. And I think sometimes people confuse themselves into thinking a game that looks realistic is more immersive, but I think that has very little to do with making a game immersive. It's more about believability.
No, I disagree. Graphics do make a game immersive. Like, it's the first point of contact when we, play a video game. It's what we see. It does make a game. It's part of what makes a game immersive.
The visuals, sound design, music, and tone of the game mesh well. If so, then that's all that's needed to immerse someone. Going back to...
That's true, but it's hard to graphics still matter.
Atomic Heart for a second, I think a big reason why it failed to immerse me is despite its impressive visuals graphically, the game's tone and art direction feels very generic, and it pales in comparison to BioShock at every turn. And I make the comparison to BioShock because obviously it was a very clear inspiration, and is often compared to BioShock, but in Atomic Heart, the Unreal Engine technology is all that's selling that game, because the story, the gameplay, and the atmosphere feels pretty uninspired, which is unfortunate. It's a game that otherwise could have been really interesting, if helmed and directed by the right talent. Sometimes I look at games from 2014 and 2015 and think that visuals peaked back then. There's of course exceptions to that in recent years, but I think it's a bit wild that Assassin's Creed Unity from 2014 somehow still has more striking visuals and lighting than the newer games.
Not really. Not really.
The Order 1886, despite being a fairly average game, looks absolutely amazing, much better than a lot of Unreal Engine titles in recent years. Dying Light 1 looks more impressive than its sequel. Even Far Cry 4 has more attention to detail than Far Cry 5, with 4 having much more lively environments versus the more static ones of 5. Battlefield...
Again, that's not really... A lot of his points are, everywhere. Like sometimes he's talking about art style, sometimes he's talking about graphical fidelity, and it's hard to really it's hard to agree with him here.
Battlefield 1's destructibility and details beat out 2042, and it's not even close. Infamous Second Son, Arkham Knight, these games still outshine games 8 to 9 years later visually. The graphical technology and more high-res textures are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for modern AAA developers because somehow we keep seeing regressions in so many different areas over the years. It's not just the visuals, but the animations too, but I'll save that for another day. Environmental storytelling is the most effective way to tell a story and immerse us in a world. Humans are visual creatures, and exposition dumping is often a big turnoff. This doesn't mean that dialogue or even some exposition is a bad thing, far from it, but it's important to make sure that the visuals speak for themselves, and the dialogue and exposition service the visuals, rather than the other way around. I think a game like Firewatch does this almost perfectly, and I plan to cover that in a future video, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that one. Thank you guys for watching. Leave your thoughts on the discussion of art style versus graphics in the comments section, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Okay, so a lot of his points I don't really agree because sometimes he's just ranting really, like he doesn't really, give more technical explanations. I would have agreed with him if he gave more, like if he explained things more on the technical side, because it sounded more like, it was just his own personal preference. The biggest thing that I do agree on is art style. Art style matters a lot, but at the same time, you can't really compare like one art style from another. The problem is realistic. The realistic art style is just it's so overused. I think usually Western developers do this, and like they fail to like add their own touch to it at the end of the day, right? But at the end of the day, graphics is very important, guys. Like it adds to the immersion. 100% adds to the immersion. I don't agree with him that, graphics isn't a factor in immersion. Sure, the music, the storytelling, the dialogue, everything adds to immersion, of course, but the thing is that the first thing we see with our eyes is the graphics. So at the end of the day, the biggest thing is really the art direction, the art style when it comes to graphics. So yeah, that's what I think. This is an okay video. I wish he explained more. Totally agree with you. I forget who said it. Yeah, some people agree with everything, but I personally don't agree with everything. Everything he says. Yeah, Life is Strange had really good like art style. I liked it so much. Yeah, see, graphics is important. Oh my God, there's someone selling. I hope that doesn't get recorded. But anyway, that's my take on this. I don't 100% agree with everything. The biggest thing I agree on is that art style does matter, and I wouldn't say it's more important than graphics, but it should be, at the same level of importance as graphics. If your art style is too similar to other games, then the game itself kind of loses its value, like in the bigger scope of things. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. I will see you again in the next video. Bye bye. Otskuro.